At least I thought at the time it was the biggest break.
Well, I didn't realize that you even...
George Jones was a living contradiction in cowboy boots, a man blessed with a voice so gripping that hardened country legends bowed before him, yet cursed with urges so destructive they almost ended his life. He was called the Possum, No-Show Jones, and even King George by those who recognized his musical genius, but the roller coaster of his personal life threatened to overshadow his towering legacy. This is the story of a boy from Beaumont who faced a brutal childhood, weathered scandalous relationships, flirted with the edge of sanity, and then crawled back from near oblivion to rewrite the country music rulebook. It's a journey packed with heartbreak, shattered bottles, and triumphant songs that still echo through every honky-tonk in America. From the moment he could speak, George felt torn between music and fear. Born in 1931, right in the jaws of the Great Depression, he grew up in a ramshackle Texas home where the walls felt thinner than paper and money was as rare as a gentle breeze on a scorching summer day. His father, a truck driver by trade, was burdened by his own demons and saw little value in coddling a son who showed an early knack for singing. When he drank, he turned cruel, forcing George to sing on command. If the boy's voice faltered, trouble lurked. Ironically, these late-night sessions hardened George's vocal cords, forging the intense, trembling quality that would later captivate millions. Neighborhood folks recalled hearing a high, urgent voice drifting through the windows late at night, layered with the sorrow that only a frightened kid could convey. Even as a small child, he discovered that music provided a sliver of control in a world otherwise run by chaos. When neighbors tossed him a few coins for belting out songs on the front porch, George realized that his voice held real power. Maybe not enough to fix everything, but enough to make people pause and listen. Soon, he was singing in church too, though family drama often spilled into the pews. His father would stumble in, reeking of whiskey, and holler for George to sing louder. Instead of condemnation, the congregation offered sympathy and more coins for the battered kid with the angelic pipes. Over time, George came to see music as both shield and sword. It granted him moments of grace, but also exposed him to the darker corners of adult life. By 9, he was a street performer, strumming a battered guitar under neon signs. Onlookers gawked at a pint-sized boy sounding like a grown man well acquainted with heartbreak. A local radio station soon gave him a short spot, paying him just enough to fan his dreams. But life at home remained rough, so he ran away multiple times, drifting through small gigs and sleeping in dingy rooms. Marriage arrived early, too early. He was no more prepared for matrimony than he was for fatherhood, and the union ended with painful abruptness. The Marine Corps offered a temporary escape when he enlisted, giving him discipline and a hint of direction. While stationed in California, he found a network of rowdy, honky-tonk bars that played real country music with zero filter. Beer mugs clanked, fistfights erupted, and lyrics spoke of cheating hearts and lost souls. George felt right at home. Returning to Texas in the early 1950s, he met producer Pappy Daly, who sensed a unique spark in the wiry young man haunted by a deep sadness. Armed with modest recording setups, George cut raw tracks that left some listeners in tears. Others called them rough and unpolished, but undeniably genuine. Then came White Lightning in 1959, a raucous romp about moonshine recorded under chaotic conditions. Legend says it took dozens of takes because George kept stumbling, yet when the final cut emerged, it soared to the top of the charts. Suddenly, the kid who once sang for tips found himself on bigger stages, with fans packing venues just to hear that soulful cry. Industry folks dubbed him the Possum because of his pointed nose and close-set eyes. He hated it, but people remembered the name, which helped his career. The good times, however, ushered in new problems. The more George toured, the deeper he dove into alcohol. Some in his orbit shrugged it off. That's just how country singers live. But the effects were tangible. He'd show up to recording sessions half drunk, belting out lines of heartbreak that seemed all too real. Oddly, fans ate it up, gravitating to the unvarnished pain. Hits multiplied. Songs like She Thinks I Still Care and The Window Up Above plastered his name all over radio stations. Behind the scenes, though, he was crumbling. By the mid-1960s, he'd earned a reputation for unpredictability, though his talent remained undeniable. Then, in 1968, fate introduced him to Tammy Wynette, an up-and-coming singer with her own reservoir of heartbreak. Their first real conversation happened in a Nashville studio, and onlookers claimed sparks flew like live wires. They were both married to other people, but that did little to stop the scorching energy between them. Tammy shared George's rural background and hard luck struggles, having clawed her way up from near poverty. She, too, channeled real anguish into every syllable she sang. Their mutual admiration morphed into a passionate affair that scandalized the country music community. Fans were divided. Some condemned them as immoral, while others applauded them as the genre's new power couple. By 1969, they were married, the tabloids calling them country's royal pair. Every interview buzzed with curiosity about their electric bond, and their duets soared up the charts. "We're gonna hold on" felt almost prophetic, a vow to keep their marriage afloat despite storm clouds overhead. On stage, they offered a blend of fiery tension and heartfelt devotion that fans devoured. Off stage, the script was far darker. George's drinking worsened and Tammy tried to pick up the pieces. He'd vanish from their home for days or skip scheduled shows. Promoters nervously began calling him No-Show Jones, selling tickets with disclaimers like, "If he shows up, you're in for a treat. If not, you're out of luck." One night, Tammy hid his car keys to stop him from driving drunk, and he famously hopped on a riding lawnmower to get to the liquor store, 8 miles away. The next morning, the story lit up newspapers and fans began bringing toy lawnmowers to his concerts. Comical as it was, it also revealed a man risking his life, marriage, and career for a bottle. Tammy was left juggling finances, raising children, and performing her own sets while trying to rein George in. Meanwhile, rumors about drugs surfaced, implying he wasn't just drowning in whiskey but also dabbling in harder substances. Many feared that a meltdown loomed just over the horizon. By the early 1970s, the meltdown arrived. He stumbled into concerts late or not at all, sometimes so incoherent he'd sing entire lines in a bizarre, cartoonish voice. Audiences witnessed a legend flailing on stage, occasionally comedic, often tragic. Some nights he shined like the star he truly was, pouring genuine agony into songs that left crowds tearful. Other nights he was a ghost of himself, slurring words until security escorted him off stage. These extremes took their toll on Tammy, who struggled to keep her own career afloat while putting out endless fires at home. Eventually, she filed for divorce in 1975, though they maintained a complicated connection. Even after the split, the record labels begged them to record duets. The heartbreak in those tracks was painfully real, as their marriage had collapsed under the weight of addiction and suspicion. One of their hits was Golden Ring, ironically describing a ring's journey from pawnshop to wedding to divorce. For the fans, it was like listening to a real soap opera unfold through the radio. With Tammy gone, George's spiral accelerated. Club owners stopped booking him, and those who did demanded insurance policies to cover the likelihood he'd back out. He frequently woke up in seedy motels, sometimes missing a wallet, sometimes missing entire chunks of memory. Bill collectors knocked on his door for missed payments, and the IRS loomed. The once glowing star found himself scrounging for cash to buy booze. Then, in 1980, came the infamous episode where cops discovered him wandering a Nashville highway, half frozen and raving to himself. At that point, even longtime supporters feared the story would end with an early grave. The man who'd electrified audiences with his voice had nearly lost that voice to the demons swirling in his head. Enter Nancy Sepulvado, a woman determined to save what remained of George Jones. She found him slumped over a bar table, halfway to oblivion, and told him plainly that if he didn't change, he'd be gone within a year. Maybe he was too tired to fight back, or maybe her unwavering resolve struck a chord. He listened. She took him to the hospital, stayed with him through violent withdrawals, and then arranged a meeting with producer Billy Sherrill. Billy had a song he swore was tailor-made for George's battered spirit. He Stopped Loving Her Today. The track told a tale of a man whose love ended only when he took his final breath. George hated its doom and gloom, insisting nobody wanted to hear about that kind of anguish. Recording was torturous. He kept forgetting the melody or storming out. Yet Nancy insisted, Billy insisted, and George eventually sang it like he was ripping his heart out. When the song hit airwaves, it soared to #1 and earned countless awards. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece, and radio stations looped it endlessly. Ironically, the tune George despised re-established him as country's most riveting voice. Still, the path wasn't all sunshine after that. Nancy battled daily to keep him sober, rummaging through closets for hidden bottles and cutting off old friends who enabled him. George cursed her at times, but he slowly recognized she was his best chance at survival. As He Stopped Loving Her Today dominated the charts, offers for concerts reappeared. Dubious promoters demanded he prove his reliability, so Nancy scheduled early arrivals and supervised him at every turn. Fans who'd once written him off returned in droves, eager to see if No-Show Jones could deliver on his redemption arc. He did. Night after night, he performed with a newfound clarity, singing those lines of heartbreak with a conviction shaped by his own near destruction. Between gigs, younger artists like Randy Travis and Alan Jackson showed up, starstruck, calling him the greatest voice in country history. In 1983, George married Nancy, and many in Nashville whispered that she was his guardian angel. She reorganized his finances, salvaged old awards from pawn shops, and helped rebuild ties with his children. The man once stumbling around highways now attended family dinners sober, sharing stories and even laughing about the lawnmower fiasco. His resurrected career soared through the 80s. He Stopped Loving Her Today had proven he was far from finished. Each new performance seemed to confirm that he could harness pain instead of letting it devour him. When critics questioned his longevity, he fired back with performances so raw they were almost uncomfortable to watch, like witnessing a man lay every regret and heartbreak on the stage. By the early 90s, George Jones was recognized as a living icon. In 1992, he received the Kennedy Center Honors, an extraordinary moment for someone once deemed hopelessly lost. Standing in the East Room of the White House, he joked that a few years earlier he couldn't even scrape together rent money. Now he was being applauded as a cultural treasure. Even Tammy Wynette, with whom he maintained a complex bond, acknowledged that nobody could sing heartbreak like George Jones. They recorded a few more duets in a calmer phase of life, their voices still blending with a bittersweet magic. These studio sessions proved that their chemistry hadn't vanished, it had merely softened into a respectful friendship. Yet tragedy nearly re-emerged in 1999 when George crashed his SUV into a bridge. Speculation flared that he'd relapsed, but Nancy insisted he was sober and simply distracted by a cell phone. Gravely injured, he spent weeks in the hospital, clinging to life. Letters poured in from fans who said his story helped them conquer their own addictions. Some recounted how He Stopped Loving Her Today reminded them that heartbreak doesn't have to be permanent defeat. George pulled through, albeit with lingering injuries. Country radio was evolving, leaning into pop-driven hits that he criticized as lacking sincerity. But even if mainstream airwaves drifted from his style, he remained the figure that younger stars idolized when they wanted to connect with the raw roots of the genre. He'd appear at award shows, greeting fresh-faced singers who saw him as a father figure or at least as a living testament to the extremes of stardom. In his last decade, he toured selectively, determined to do justice to his catalog rather than overextend himself. Fans thronged to see him, not merely for nostalgia's sake, but because he could still deliver. Age may have softened certain notes, but the emotional punch remained brutal and mesmerizing. People erupted into applause when he announced songs like The Grand Tour or Why Baby Why, each carrying the weight of decades of joy and despair. He occasionally reminded audiences about the countless times he'd nearly thrown it all away. But it never felt like a lecture, more like a reminder that second chances aren't guaranteed, so you might as well fight for them. Backstage, he joked about the "No-Show Jones" shirts fans wore, chuckling at how ironically close he'd come to making that nickname permanent. Then came April 26th, 2013. News rippled through Nashville that George Jones had passed away at 81. The loss felt seismic. Outside the Grand Ole Opry House, fans set up makeshift memorials with flowers and notes thanking him for putting words to their own heartbreak. The funeral service was broadcast live, with stars from all corners of music attending. Alan Jackson tried to sing "He Stopped Loving Her Today," but broke into tears mid-chorus, eventually finishing in a choked voice while the crowd wept with him. Tammy Wynette had died years earlier, but their daughter Georgette stood in her mother's place thanking Nancy for saving her father. Tributes came from rock icons, pop singers, and of course the country faithful who had followed his chaotic journey. They all agreed George Jones was more than just a country singer. He was the embodiment of heartbreak, redemption, and raw authenticity wrapped into a single, trembling voice. In the years since, he's only grown in stature. Younger acts still study his phrasing, chasing that elusive crack in his voice that revealed so much emotion. His songs remain staples in bars, radio playlists, and personal collections, each note conjuring a man who battled every demon and lived to sing about it. When critics compile lists of the greatest recordings in country history, George's name inevitably appears near the top. Even the stories about missed concerts and riding lawnmowers to bars are retold as cautionary tales with a streak of tragic humor. They're testaments to how far he fell and how much further he soared once he found the resolve to rebuild his life. It's easy to reduce George Jones's story to the bullet points of a typical cautionary tale: rough childhood, unstoppable talent, substance abuse, and eventual revival. But in reality, it's a testament to the wild, unpredictable spirit that sometimes accompanies breathtaking artistry. No matter how many times he stumbled, his music never lost its capacity to speak to the universal ache inside us all. That's why fans stuck around even when he was unreachable. Deep down, people sensed that no matter how chaotic his personal life became, he sang from a place of unvarnished truth. And sometimes, truth, sung in that trembling hush, can transcend any scandal, any heartbreak, any scandalous rumor about drunken escapades. Reflecting on his legacy, one sees a man who refused to let heartbreak be the final note. His recorded tracks stand like lonely cathedrals on the radio dial, reminding new generations that heartbreak and resilience walk hand in hand. From the battered kid forced to sing in the middle of the night to the honored guest at the White House, George's saga shows how pain can fuel profound beauty. For all the chaos, he left behind a blueprint for turning personal torment into something that moves hearts around the world. Even today, if you walk into the right bar at the right time, you'll hear that unmistakable cry emerging from a jukebox. In those moments, it feels like George never left, like he's still pulling up a bar stool beside us, tipping his hat, and pouring his entire soul into each note. Such is the enduring power of George Jones, a country legend whose life story is as haunting as the melodies he recorded. He was never simple or safe, and perhaps that's why his voice can still squeeze tears from eyes that thought they'd run dry. His name will forever evoke images of battered guitars, neon lights, and second chances that miraculously came through just in time. For all his missteps, he taught the world a potent truth. Sometimes, the ugliest trials shape the richest art. Country music needed George Jones because he carried the genre's raw, complicated heart in his voice, fragile yet unbreakable, trembling yet triumphant. It's that paradox that keeps us pressing replay, reliving his story in every achy verse. And as long as heartbreak finds new hosts in this world, George Jones's legacy will stand tall, an immortal testament to what real country music sounds like when it stares adversity square in the eye and refuses to back down. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.